Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Robbie. I'm from Thames Valley Management Record Centre. I've occupied many roles at TVERC, currently acting as the interim project manager. I've also been a project officer and a data assistant, so I've sort of been part of all sides of what we do. Okay, so what do we do? Um, Essentially, we act as a central hub for information, all sorts of sort of environmental information um, across Oxfordshire and Berkshire. This is mainly species records, but we also hold information on sites, habitats, flood zones, ancient woodland, um, public rights of way, all sorts. And then, so we take that information from all the sources that we can get it from, we put it in sort of a standardized, useful format, and then we make it available for the people who need it, which is which is sort of all conservation groups, local authorities, basically anyone who's making decisions or making any actions. We help, we sort of enable access and interpretation of our data in order to sort of make those decisions the best they could possibly be. So there you go. We take the raw data, we manage it, we analyze it, we interpret it. We create a huge range of outputs, which include but are not limited to reports, data sets, and maps. Um, Basically, just make it understandable for the target audience, um, so that sort of everyone can prioritize what they need to do in the right places, and don't waste their time, because we all have very limited time, we have very limited funds, and we don't want to waste that time doing things that sort of could be done a lot better. So sort of taking that little bit of extra time at the start of a project to look at the data, see what's already been recorded and what's out there, um, and then planning it sort of using the available information can sort of be very effective. So our data comes in a lot of formats. We have some raw data, which is sort of declining rapidly in quantity to what we get in, which we keep in the archive at Speedwell House, where our offices are in Oxford. Haven't been there for a while, but we've still got all of the paper data in there. So that includes sort of old diaries, old OS maps, all sorts, which is very interesting to sort through. So there you can see just how sort of little paper data we get now. So this is how many data sets we receive per year. 2020 um, is obviously, this hasn't finished yet, and we're sort of very much on course to overtake 2019, because we always get more data sets in the winter when people have had time to sort of think about their records, log them. Because in the summer, people are normally busy out surveying, which I do not blame them for. And then here we can see all of our species records are validated by an army of volunteers. Um, so the data team, which I am still technically part of, does a fair bit of that work, but a lot of it goes to the volunteers, and without them, we would be completely inundated with records. So there you can see that our processing time has generally been decreasing over time. There's been a bit of an increase in 2020 for obvious reasons. We're all working from home for the foreseeable future, so that's had some issues. What we're adapting to and dealing with, and sort of everything's sort of ticking along quite nicely now. And the main issue is that we've been getting so much more data because people haven't been able to go out and survey. So we've been getting all of their records, which is a very good problem to have. It just means we have a lot to get through. So we hold a database of species records from Oxfordshire and Berkshire. In that database are 3.2 million records, and almost 750,000 of those are protected and notable species, which are sort of the blanket term we give to any species that's um, either protected by national, regional, or international legislation, or is a particularly notable species, or an invasive species, for example. So they're the sort of big ones that matter for the planning perspective. But obviously, the other 2.25 million records are very important as well, and we sort of encourage you to record anything you see, not just the sort of particularly rare or interesting things. Now you can see almost 70% come from biological recorders, of which I'm sure many of those from people in this webinar. Um, so we're very reliant on sort of our recording community, and very grateful for the work that you do and letting us access those records. So if you provide data to us, your records are provided to TVERC partners, which are all of the sort of local authorities, um, so all your district councils across Oxfordshire and Berkshire, the Environment Agency, the National Trust, the Wildlife Trust for bucks, barks, and oxon, etc. And they're also provided to anyone who needs them through commercial and non-commercial data searches. So we have our database, and from this we create GIS layers, which are basically sort of mapped data, so you can overlay it onto a map of Oxfordshire and Berkshire and see where the record was recorded. So we extract that into a partner GIS layer for all of those partners that I listed above. So if it's for West Oxfordshire, for example, then we will only extract records from West Oxfordshire and not sort of pollute them with all 3.5 million records. And we also create data search layers, which go to whoever requests the data. So you can request data on our website via an online form. If you are doing work in sort of one site for conservation or research purposes, then that data, we waive the fee for that data. But if the data is sort of for anything that could be commercial, like development, then there is a charge. So biological recording, why and how? This is sort of the next part of the talk as a little preview. TVERC, iRecord, and other apps, which is how to record. I'll talk you through the Local Wildlife Sites project, which is run by TVERC and the Wildlife Trust in Berkshire and Oxfordshire, and then what can we do for you? So we'll start basics. What is a record? A record is basically you letting us know, or you recording for yourself, what you've seen. So the key thing is what did you see? How many of them? Abundance data is really useful for us. Where did you see it is obviously very important. What life stage was it at? Was it juvenile? Was it an adult? Who saw it, which is normally you, but if you're sort of running a local group, it could be anyone in your group. What type of record is it? So that's a sort of very flexible one. Is it a, have you been sort of doing dormouse surveys? Have you been doing bat roost surveys? Particularly with bats and birds, if it's a roost, then it's very important to note that down, whereas if it's just a flyover, that's a little bit less useful. When did you see it? Obviously useful for us in determining dates and trends over time. And then a photo is always very useful to sort of help us validate what species it is. So that's what constitutes a record. And you can record this information in quite a lot of ways. And there are good ways and bad ways, essentially. If it's so the red column here is like the bare minimum data you can record. This is very much something that we would want still. We wouldn't sort of only want a record if it's perfect. But the sort of level of recording in the green side is definitely preferable because we can get a lot more out of that. So if you said it was about Little Whittenham in 2020, and then Wild Oxfordshire recorded it, that's useful for us. We can sort of, if someone queries it, we can point them to the right organisation at least, and then hopefully Wild Oxfordshire would have records and they could say, oh yes, Roselle saw that bat, we can ask her more about it. And similarly, Little Whittenham is, although it's a small village, is a big area for us to sort of say this is where it was, whereas a sort of 10-figure grid reference, that gives us a lot of detail. We know exactly where it was. And the same, if it's a bat, we can say, yep, there was a bat there. But if it's a soprano pipistrelle, then we know that exactly what species it is. So we can tell if someone's looking to sort of do any work on that site, we can tell them exactly what's there. And so they can best sort of either protect it or enhance that habitat for that species. So we turn your observations into data. So you do the first bit, you see the species, and then you put it into, make it into a record. You put it into a spreadsheet or a diary or however you record it. And then we turn that record into data, and we use that through a whole variety of projects and services, which I'll outline for you later. But that's basically the nuts and bolts of what we do. And then this information is used by planning authorities and developers to make informed decisions on the sort of design of future development, so we can best make sure wildlife is fully represented in that process. We can make sure that because if we don't know it's there, we can't protect it or mitigate for it. Whereas if what we do know is there, we can then sort of fight to get bat boxes put in, or make sure the development takes into account the current level of wildlife there. We can also use that to help farmers, landowners, conservation organisations manage their land for conservation. Again, if you know what's there already, you can sort of prioritise surveys, you can plan management, how to best enhance your sort of land, or a sort of bit of publicly owned local land for biodiversity, or for a specific species if that's sort of what you're looking to do. And then by nature partnerships to direct wildlife conservation work, a similar thing. When we're working at sort of a county scale, it can be very difficult to prioritise and very difficult to direct work in the most effective way. But when we've got a very nice coverage of data, which we do in Oxfordshire and Berkshire, using that can really help with that process. And for education and research, so we also have quite close ties with the local universities, Oxford, Reading, Oxford Brookes, as well as Imperial College, who have a couple of campuses in Berkshire. And we work with the sort of zoology, biology, environmental science departments, supply our data where needed. They send us their data when they've got something useful, and we've got quite a nice free flow of that. And we offer sort of services to their students as well. So if they're looking to do a mini project, or if they're looking to do their dissertation thesis with us, we can supply them with data for that, give them some guidance. And especially at the moment where everything's remote, we've had a lot of interest from students, and we've got a lot of students currently working on little 1-week projects looking at sort of little subsets of our data. So this is kind of a quick overview of the planning system. I won't go into it in too much detail. It's not sort of hugely, potentially hugely interesting for you, even though it's very relevant to me. But essentially, these are the areas where data is very important and where our data is used. So in sort of scoping out what's currently there, doing the initial desk study before a development, and then in reporting the results of their impact assessment, they also need to refer to our data, resend the data to us. And then, so that's sort of the developer consultant side of things. And then we get to the local authority, where they can sort of, the local authorities are our partners, so they will have access to our data, as we went over earlier. So they can sort of investigate our databases to see if they have come to TVERC, as they should do, through all the right channels, and then use that sort of information to help with their decision making. And we work quite closely with our local authority partners, so that if they need a little bit more, if they need to query something, if they want us to do a sort of a little bit more data analysis to help them make a decision whether the sort of environmental side of the development is being met, we can do that for them as well. And then we also get to sort of the consultee part, where a particularly large development or somewhere near some particularly important land, there might be a sort of group like the Environment Agency, like the RSPB, who are involved in this process, and they might want to sort of look at our data as well, and for us to advise them on potentially what decisions should be made. And also from sort of a member of the public point of view, if there is a planning application that you would like to comment on, we offer a standard data search for no charge for that purpose. So if there's development near you, you think there might be sort of potential biodiversity impacts, you can ask us and we'll be able to let you know that information for no fee. So this is where we get our data from. As you can see, there's a lot of sources and a lot of formats that this data comes in that sort of we have to deal with. So firstly, we get a lot of data from local recording groups and national recording schemes through data exchanges, as often a local recording group or a national scheme are very interested in what we have as well. So we're happy to sort of give and take our data. We'll send them the records of the particular taxon group or area that they're interested in, and then they send us the records that they've got, and then we can sort of share information in that way. We get data from our local authorities and other partners, any survey work that they're doing. We get data from consultants in quite a few ways, either directly from the consultants where we have sort of direct links with them, through the local authority ecologists who might send us the site assessments that the consultants will do for any developments, and through local authority planning portals. Individual wildlife recorders, which maybe some of you in this webinar might be, send us data, which is really valuable data. TVERC ourselves create some through local wildlife site surveys, field days, and other events, which sadly we weren't able to do this summer, but we were really looking forward to sort of rerunning next year, hopefully. And then online sources, which is the big growing data source that we're looking at. So there's a lot of them and a ever growing amount of them to keep up with. TVERC have our own sightings website, which we are we scrape data from, get it from government data portals. iRecord is probably the largest online recording source, which we can get some really useful data from. The NBN Atlas, similar, and then other online sources such as Living Record, Record Pool. There's a host of them that we we have to keep up to date with and scrape data from. And all of this data comes in a huge different variety of both quality and the format. And a big part of what a record center does is standardizing all of that data into one format and then combining it into a database so it's usable for everyone. We do that in the following way, which I'll quickly whistle-stop tour you through. It's essentially we get the data, we log it to make sure we know what we've got, when we got it, and who gave it to us, which is really important because if someone queries a record, we need to be able to go back and ask the initial recorder what happened, which is normally just, was it really there? Yes, it was. But sometimes there's a sort of mix up with grid references or whatever else goes wrong in the process. And then we validate that. So is it within Oxfordshire and Berkshire? Is the grid reference where it says it is? Is it more than 6 figures? For some species, we're happy to take a 4-figure grid reference, but normally 6-figure is our sort of minimum amount, or tetrad, either or works for us. But then obviously the more precise, the better. Convert it to our format and then import it to our database, and then make sure we know where the original data is kept. We don't delete any data, we always archive it. So if it ever needs to go back to anyone, we can have a look. So iRecord, we've recently reported 18,000 iRecord records, and then this exercise will be repeated every year. So that 18,000 is all of the validated records from the start of iRecord, and now we can keep that number down by doing this every year. So because of the huge volume on iRecord and limited manpower we have, we can only import the verified records. So basically, if you've got an iRecord account, you will get a notification when your record is verified. And there are county recorders on iRecord who are sort of experts in their particular taxon group. And so there might be that you've been recording moths in Berkshire or moths in Oxfordshire, where there's a county recorder and you're getting your records verified, and then they're filtering through us. But if you're also recording another group, say leafhoppers, and there's not a county recorder, so none of those records are verified, we won't get hold of them. So if that is the case, please send them to us directly so we can do that ourselves. And I'm happy to sort of speak to anyone individually if you're not sure if there's a validator or a verifier or not in your area for your taxon group of interest. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of other recording tools and apps. Everyone probably has a favorite or different preferences, but the tips I would say are pick one. Do not put your records on iRecord and iSpot or iRecord and Living Record, because then it really causes an issue for people trying to use that data for replication and duplication of records, which is very difficult to spot. We do the best we can. Some always slip through the cracks, but we spend a lot of time on sort of making sure we're not getting a duplicate record. So if you send your data to us directly, and you also put it on iRecord, that's fine. We're happy for you to do that. But if it sort of means that we have to then filter out the iRecord records that you have already sent to us, which can complicate things a little bit. So yeah, again, any questions on that sort of more specifically about your situation, I'd be happy to answer, because it's a very complicated issue and it's difficult to sum up in sort of a quick whistle-stop tour. Yeah. So I'll move on to the local wildlife sites project now. So this is a project that we run with, um, in collaboration with the Wildlife Trust, and on our own, depending on which county you're in. So it's where there is sort of private and public land that's recognised as having a wildlife value, of particular biodiversity importance, but it's not already protected by any sort of statutory government regulations. Um, but it can sort of form links between these statutorily protected sites. Um, yeah, these are listed in the local authority's local plan, and they must be taken into account when considering planning applications. So if a site is approved as a local wildlife site, it will be offered a degree of protection. So essentially, the way it works as a proposed site is identified. Um, this could be identified by you or anyone. So if there's a particularly nice area of land nearby to you that you're worried about, or just want to see sort of if it's good enough to be designated, check with us first that it's not through doing a data search of your local area. But then if there's nothing that sort of is flagged up, you can let us know about it through sort of the local wildlife site application form, and then we will identify as a potential local wildlife site. Then we will then get in contact with the landowner to get survey permission, which is often a tricky part, and quite time consuming. We'll then go and survey the land, do an ecological assessment of it, write a report up, and then send that report off to our local wildlife site selection panel, who will review it against the existing selection criteria, and then either accept, reject, or defer the the application. We try and avoid deferring as much as possible. That's only when more evidence is needed to make a decision. And then we aim to revisit sites every 10 years, which we tend to do with landowner permission, but sometimes the landowner won't want a new survey, or it will change hands and we won't be able to get access to it again. But then once those sites are accepted, they are given a degree of protection. And quite importantly, while they're a proposed site, they are still protected under the same legislation as when they've been accepted. So if if sort of they're a proposed site and it takes a while for the selection to occur, they will still be offered that level of protection. So here you can see the local wildlife sites in Oxfordshire. It's approximately 3% of the land area in the county. We survey about 40 sites a year, which is my colleague Julie does most of that surveying. And yeah, so you can see there's almost 400 local wildlife sites and 69 proposed sites. Then that's the picture in Berkshire, 8% of the area, so a lot more of Berkshire is covered by these. And there's over 700 and 11 proposed, which you can see is almost double what Oxfordshire has. So then something we do in collaboration with Wild Oxfordshire is the conservation target areas, which are key areas of biodiversity and of priority habitat, which have the potential for habitat restoration. So you can have a look at more info on this on the Wild Oxfordshire website, but it basically serves sort of where are the best bits, and then linking those bits up. So if you're looking to sort of manage or improve land, you've got a nice amount, a sort of good starting point in these CTAs. And we use these CTAs you can see these maps, if I flick to and fro, they might look quite similar because the CTAs form the basis of the nature recovery network. So I know you had Mike did a talk on this, I think it was the last week's webinar, so I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but TVERC did the sort of technical mapping work for the nature recovery network, identifying core areas, recovery zones, and wider landscape, because we thought all of Oxfordshire should really be sort of a target for nature's recovery. But these recovery zones, so the core areas are what's already protected. The recovery zone are sort of key areas to focus for habitat restoration, so we can link up the already good bits and improve the sort of connectivity across the county. And there will be updates made to this based off of your feedback. So I'll give you a quick run through of projects we're doing this year so you can see how your data might be used if you submit the records to us. So the big one at the moment is the Oxfordshire Tree Opportunity Mapping Project, where we are working with a group called Oxtrees, led by Jamie Hartzell and Victoria McNamara. to essentially improve tree planting across Oxfordshire. And it sort of is easy enough to say, okay, we want to double tree planting in Oxfordshire. The difficult question is where. Where can we do this where it would most benefit both the local population, the biodiversity, without planting trees where they shouldn't be trees? So if you've got nice quality grassland, you don't want to plant the trees all over that because that would decline the quality of that habitat. So we've been working very hard with Jamie and Victoria to identify areas sort of for tree planting, for woody linear features, which you can see here on the hedges. And sort of, yeah, you've got opportunities there for external hedges around fields, internal hedges sort of within large enough fields, and street trees along sort of roadsides that are of appropriate width. And there's sort of a whole load of other treescapes. That's going to be a really interesting one to keep your eyes out for. So you might be aware of the large development happening just north of the A40 by Ensham, which is called the Saltcross Garden Village. This is meant to be, yeah, a garden village, so it's meant to be a sort of nice natural environment development where sort of there's enough room for people, but there's also a sort of good quality of biodiversity there. And this has been a flagship project for biodiversity net gain, where a development should improve the biodiversity of an area and sort of supply that in a measurable gain. So we've done a lot of work with the West Oxfordshire District Council in sort of advising on how that could best be supplied, that biodiversity net gain on site. Pond House Copse survey. So this is where a local recorder identified a nice pond in a local woodland called Pond House Copse, and wondered if that could sort of be given this this local wildlife site protection. Pond House Copse is a local wildlife site already, but this pond was slightly outside of it, so it could extend the boundary. So she flagged that up with us. Then we went to the landowner, sort of working with her, and yeah, went to survey the pond, and have just written up a report to send over to the landowner so he can hopefully sort of improve the management of that pond for biodiversity. Neighbourhood plans. So this might interest a few of you if there's any parish council or neighbourhood sort of parish wildlife groups. We offer sort of quite a high level of support for parish level neighbourhood development plans, sort of offering green corridor analysis, which you can see there to outline areas to improve connectivity, and offering sort of specific bespoke data search reports for parish level, where you can see what you've got in your area, and then they can include that within their local development plans to outline those sort of areas to protect. So what we do is evidence-based decision making. You can see here we've got an ever-growing number of records. It's all local data, and it's very important to use local data rather than national data, because national data always sort of misses those things that only really you guys know as the local community and the local recorders. So when you look at sort of a standardized national data set, you lose that, and record centers are the sort of the bridge between the big national data sets and the sort of individual recorders where you know best about your patch. So yeah, we support decision makers, sort of a wide range of decision makers, and ensure that that local regional level is accounted for in sort of the wider level planning. Yeah, and this is, so we've got a recorder's grant with Trust for Oxfordshire Environment for the last 5 years. We've supplied TOE with some funding for local recording groups, essentially, from £500 to £2,000. And it could buy sort of equipment for you, it could fund volunteer time. So there you can see some examples. In Benson Nature Group bought a moth trap, specimen pots, hand lenses, etc. The Oxfordshire Fens Project could buy equipment for invertebrate surveys to monitor change, and the West Oxfordshire Farm and Bird Project could buy mist nets and bird rings. And there's some information there on how to apply, and I'd be happy to share this presentation, Roselle, so the links and everything can be shared. And that's all from me. Yeah, thank you very much for listening.
That's brilliant, Robbie. Thank you very much. We've got questions coming through thick and fast. Sophie, would you like to?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we've got loads of questions. So firstly, we've got one from Colin Bloxham, who was wondering whether you ask for people to record the time of day as well. Colin, I don't know if you want to go into more detail about this or whether you just want whether that's enough.
No, it was just curious because obviously some species you can expect to see at a particular time of the day, and any recordings that don't conform to what you would expect could potentially highlight anomalies, a problem with regard to that particular species. So just curious, really.
Yeah, essentially the answer is yes. We will take as much detail as we can get. Essentially, we're sort of very reluctant to sort of set strict standards because we want all the data there is, and if it's sort of, we can sort of decide what we want, what's sort of useful for us and not. But essentially, more detail is better. We would never say no to time of day or very specific abundance information or anything like that. And especially when it's relevant to a specific species, if it's time of day is very sort of rare. If it's normally seen in sort of the middle of the night and it pops up at sort of 11 a.m., then it probably would be something worth noting, and it's something we could look at, see if that becomes more common over time as a trend, and then try and figure out why that might be and what we might be able to do about
it. Okay. Wendy, has Roselle answered your question enough, or would you like to ask Robbie?
Well, I think it is a perennial question that I'm sure other people have thought about it. I've contributed to the ponds, the pollinator survey during the summer that CEH ran, and I had the verification information come through last week. And I wondered whether my information was also getting through to TVERC or not. I've also registered sightings of stag beetles because Wallingford is a hotspot, but that I did that with PTES. And I've got swifts on the house, so I was registering, information about the swifts with a swift conservation group. Now, does that information filter through to TVERC as well?
Yeah, it all depends on whether we have agreements with those groups, whether the groups are happy to share their data with us. It's all sort of very case by case basis. So I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I don't necessarily deal with the species data, but if you pop me an email with that information, sort of each of those, which groups you shared it with, and what data there is, then I can find out what we've got and what we haven't got for you. And then obviously anything that we haven't already received, I would very much like if you have it sort of on record yourself, and you'll be happy to share it.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Robbie.
That's all right.
Great. Adele is saying that there's a huge number of recording tools. What's your view on the pros and cons of rationalising?
Yeah, so it is sort of, it's a difficult one because from a sort of record centre point of view, we would much prefer there was just one, because then everything we want is in one place, and obviously reduce the amount of work we have, and it reduced the amount of stuff that slipped through the cracks as well. But I recognise there are definite pros and cons for all of them, and that people have different preferences. And sort of some recording tools, like maybe the mammal tracker from the Mammal Society, obviously key to sort of tuned into one taxon group. And if that's the one you're interested in, that's probably going to be the easiest one to use. So essentially, I would say there's definitely a reasoning to have more than one. Definitely a reason to have sort of as many as there are. But there also needs to be some level of sort of the people who organise these apps need to make sure that that data is going to be used. And so obviously if record centres don't know about it, but there's a lot of other organisations who won't have the other knowledge of the app that exists, or they won't have the manpower to find another app, figure out how they can download it, figure out the licensing, and then format it into their format. So it's sort of a bit of a give and take. I would say there should be more than one option, so people have one to choose from, but an completely sort of an infinite number is not going to do anyone any good, because it just dilutes the records even further.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose I always wonder whether or not we're actually just being too polite about the sort of the prevalence of, you know, the tendency to create more and more sort of apps of a specialist nature, and actually just to think, you know, actually this isn't, it's actually failing to help. So yeah, I know it's a perennial problem, but thank you for your views.
That's all right.
Great. So we have one from Lukey, who is wondering whether all records from all recording apps are shared with the NBN Atlas.
Yeah, no is the answer, unfortunately. It would be useful if NBN was central. iRecord is meant to all filter through to the NBN, but that isn't always the case. And again, that's only verified records. So if you ever want to look at anything that's not verified, which we still do, and we do intend to sort of be able to look at these unverified records eventually, it's just a matter of sort of staff time. Then yeah, the NBN has a lot of information on it, and we do access that information. But yeah, it's not a sort of one-stop shop. Really, the only option for one-stop shops that you have are sort of your local record centres. But then that's a county thing. So if you're doing a national scale project, it is difficult to sort of get good quality local scale data, but for a larger area. Yeah.
Great.